What if I told you that a man who lived over 2,500 years ago had the solution to every heated argument you've ever been in? What if I told you that this ancient Chinese philosopher discovered a principle so powerful that it could transform not just your personal relationships, but potentially end conflicts between nations? And what if I told you that this wisdom is contained in just 11 simple words? You're probably thinking I'm exaggerating. After all, we live in an age of endless debates, political polarization, and social media arguments that seem to spiral out of control within minutes. How could anything from ancient China possibly solve modern problems? But here's the thing about timeless wisdom: it's timeless for a reason. The quote I'm talking about comes from Confucius, and it goes like this: "Do not impose on others what you do not wish for yourself." Now, before you roll your eyes and think this is just another version of the golden rule that you learned in kindergarten, stick with me, because what Confucius was really talking about goes far deeper than simple politeness. He was describing a fundamental shift in how we approach conflict, disagreement, and human interaction itself. Most people know this principle in its positive form: treat others as you would like to be treated. But Confucius gave us the negative formulation, and that difference is absolutely crucial. Instead of asking how would I want to be treated, he's asking what would I definitely not want someone to do to me. And when you start thinking about arguments and conflicts through this lens, everything changes. Think about the last argument you had. Maybe it was with your spouse about household chores. Maybe it was with a coworker about a project deadline. Maybe it was online with a stranger about politics. Now, I want you to really think about what was happening in that argument. Were you trying to understand the other person's perspective? Or were you trying to win? Were you listening to their concerns? Or were you just waiting for your turn to speak? Here's what Confucius understood that we've somehow forgotten. Most arguments aren't really about the topic being discussed. They're about power, control, and the desperate human need to be right. When we argue, we're not usually seeking truth or understanding. We're seeking victory. And that's exactly what Confucius was warning us against when he said, "Do not impose on others what you do not wish for yourself." He wasn't just talking about being nice. He was talking about recognizing that the other person in your argument is a human being with their own thoughts, feelings, fears, and experiences. He was talking about recognizing that they have just as much right to their perspective as you do to yours. Let me give you a concrete example. Imagine you're in a political discussion with someone who holds completely opposite views from yours. The natural tendency is to try to convince them that they're wrong. You cite statistics, you bring up examples, you might even raise your voice. But what are you really doing? You're imposing your worldview on them. You're essentially saying, your perspective is invalid, and mine is the only correct one. Now, flip the script. How would you feel if someone approached you that way? How would you react if someone dismissed your deeply held beliefs and tried to force their opinions on you? You'd probably get defensive. You'd probably dig in your heels. You'd probably argue even harder. And that's exactly what happens to the other person when you do it to them. But here's where Confucius gets really interesting. He didn't just identify the problem. He provided a solution. When you truly internalize the principle of not imposing on others what you wouldn't want imposed on yourself, your entire approach to disagreement changes. Instead of trying to win, you start trying to understand. Instead of attacking the person's position, you start exploring it. This doesn't mean you become a pushover. It doesn't mean you abandon your own beliefs or stop standing up for what you think is right. What it means is that you recognize the humanity in the person you're disagreeing with. You acknowledge that they might have good reasons for believing what they believed, even if those reasons don't make sense to you. Confucius had another quote that builds on this idea. The person who asks a question is a fool for 5 minutes. The person who does not ask a question remains a fool forever. Think about how this applies to arguments. When we're so focused on proving our point, we stop asking questions. We stop being curious about why the other person believes what they believe. We stop learning. But what if, instead of trying to impose our view on them, we got genuinely curious about their perspective? What if we asked questions, not to trap them or expose flaws in their logic, but to actually understand where they're coming from? This is what Confucius was really getting at. He understood that wisdom comes from humility, and humility comes from recognizing that we might not have all the answers. I know what some of you are thinking right now. You're thinking, but what if the other person is clearly wrong? What if they're spreading misinformation? What if their beliefs are actually harmful? These are fair questions, and Confucius had thoughts on this too. He said, the superior man understands what is right. The inferior man understands what will sell. In other words, There's a difference between holding firm to your principles and simply trying to win an argument. When someone is spreading genuinely harmful information, there are ways to address that without imposing your worldview on them. You can provide correct information without attacking their character. You can stand up for what's right without trying to dominate the other person. The key is intention. Are you trying to help them understand, or are you trying to make them submit to your authority? Are you sharing information because you genuinely care about truth, or because you want to prove how smart you are? Confucius would argue that the moment you stop caring about the other person's well-being and start caring only about being right, you've lost the moral high ground. This principle becomes even more powerful when you apply it to listening. Most of us are terrible listeners, especially during arguments. We're not really hearing what the other person is saying. We're just waiting for them to finish so we can make our next point. But think about it from Confucius's perspective. How would you feel if someone wasn't really listening to you? How would you feel if you were pouring your heart out about something you cared deeply about, and the other person was clearly just waiting for their turn to speak? You'd feel dismissed. You'd feel disrespected. You'd probably get angry or hurt. So why do we do this to others? Why do we impose our impatience and our need to be heard on people, when we know exactly how it feels to be on the receiving end of that behavior? Real listening, the kind Confucius would advocate for, means temporarily setting aside your own agenda and truly focusing on understanding what the other person is trying to communicate. It means asking follow-up questions. It means reflecting back what you heard to make sure you understood correctly. It means acknowledging their feelings, even if you disagree with their conclusions. This is where the magic happens. When people feel heard and understood, they become much more open to hearing your perspective in return. It's not a manipulation technique, it's basic human psychology. We all want to feel valued and respected. When we feel like the other person genuinely cares about our point of view, we naturally become more receptive to theirs. Confucius understood this dynamic perfectly. He said, "If you would govern a state of 1,000 chariots, you must pay strict attention to business, be true to your word, be economical in expenditure, and love the people." Notice that last part. Love the people. Even in governance, even when making difficult decisions that not everyone will agree with, the foundation has to be genuine care for the people you're serving. The same principle applies to personal relationships, whether you're talking to your teenager about their curfew, discussing finances with your spouse, or trying to resolve a conflict with a friend. The foundation has to be genuine care for the other person. The moment you stop caring about their well-being and start caring only about getting your way, you've shifted from problem-solving to power struggle, and power struggles. As Confucius understood, never really have winners. Even if you manage to force the other person to comply with your wishes, you've damaged the relationship. You've created resentment. You've made it less likely that they'll come to you with problems in the future. You've imposed something on them that you wouldn't want imposed on yourself. The experience of being dominated and controlled. But what does this look like in practice? How do you actually apply this principle in real-world situations? Let me walk you through some examples. Let's say you're having a disagreement with your partner about money. Maybe they spent money on something you think was unnecessary, and you're frustrated. The natural impulse might be to lecture them about financial responsibility, to point out all the ways they've been irresponsible in the past, to make them feel guilty for their decision. But stop and ask yourself, how would you feel if your partner approached you that way? How would you react if they made you feel stupid and irresponsible? You'd probably get defensive. You'd probably start pointing out their financial mistakes. The conversation would quickly spiral into a fight about who's worse with money, and nothing would get resolved. Now apply Confucius's principle. Instead of imposing judgment and criticism, what if you approached the situation with curiosity and care? What if you said something like, "I noticed you bought that expensive gadget, and I'm feeling a bit anxious about our budget. Can you help me understand what was going through your mind when you decided to buy it?" This approach acknowledges your feelings without attacking their character. It expresses your concern without imposing judgment. It invites them to share their perspective, instead of demanding that they defend their actions. And because you're not attacking them, they're much more likely to respond with openness instead of defensiveness. They might explain that they've been feeling stressed at work, and the purchase was an attempt at self-care. They might admit that they didn't really think about the budget impact, and are willing to return the item. They might have a completely valid reason that you hadn't considered. Whatever their response, you're now having a conversation instead of an argument, and you're working together toward a solution instead of trying to defeat each other. This same principle applies to larger conflicts. Think about political discussions, which have become increasingly toxic in recent years. Most political arguments follow a predictable pattern. Both sides present their positions. Both sides attack the other's position. Both sides dig in deeper. And eventually someone storms off, or the conversation ends in hostility. But what if we applied Confucius's wisdom to political discourse? Instead of trying to impose our political views on others, what if we approached political differences with genuine curiosity? What if we asked questions like, what experiences in your life have shaped this political belief? Or what are you most concerned about when it comes to this issue? When you approach political conversations this way, something remarkable happens. You start to understand that most people, regardless of their political affiliation, are motivated by genuine concerns about important issues. They might prioritize different values than you do. They might have had different life experiences that have shaped their perspective, but they're not usually evil or stupid or brainwashed. Despite what social media might have you believe, this doesn't mean you have to agree with everyone's political views. Confucius wasn't advocating for moral relativism. He believed in right and wrong, in justice and injustice. But he also understood that you can't force people to see things your way through argumentation and hostility. You can only influence people by treating them with the same respect and consideration that you would want to be treated with. Confucius had a beautiful way of expressing this idea. The gentleman understands what is right. The small man understands what is profitable. When we approach conflicts with the intention of understanding and mutual respect, we're operating from a place of moral strength. When we approach conflicts with the intention of winning at all costs, we're operating from a place of ego and The ripple effects of this shift in approach are enormous. When you stop trying to impose your will on others, they stop feeling the need to resist you. When you start treating them with the respect you would want to be treated with, they start reciprocating that respect. When you approach disagreements with curiosity instead of judgment, you actually learn things. You grow as a person. You become wiser. And here's the really incredible part. This approach is contagious. When you model this kind of respectful, curious engagement, other people start to adopt it too. They start approaching their own conflicts differently. The culture of conversation begins to shift, one interaction at a time. I've seen this happen in workplaces where one person decides to start approaching conflicts with Confucian principles, instead of the usual blame and defense cycles. Meetings start to become more collaborative. People start sharing ideas more freely because they're not afraid of being shot down. Problems get solved more efficiently because everyone's energy is focused on finding solutions instead of protecting their ego. I've seen it happen in families where parents decide to apply these principles to their relationships with their children, instead of power struggles over homework and chores. Conversations become more about understanding the child's perspective and working together to address challenges. The relationship improves, and ironically, the parents often get better compliance with their expectations because the children feel heard and respected. The principle even works in customer service situations. Instead of approaching an angry customer with defensiveness and by-the-book policies, what if you approach them with genuine curiosity about their frustration? What if you tried to understand not just what went wrong, but how it affected them personally? Most of the time, angry customers just want to be heard and understood. When they feel like you genuinely care about their experience, they become much more reasonable and much easier to work with. But here's what I find most profound about Confucius's insight. It's not just about ending arguments. It's about preventing them in the first place. When you consistently treat people with the respect and consideration you would want to be treated with, you create relationships that are much less prone to conflict. Think about the people in your life who you never seem to argue with. What is it about those relationships that's different? I'll bet that in those relationships, both people feel heard, valued, and respected. Both people feel like their perspective matters to the other person. Both people approach disagreements with the assumption that the other person has good intentions. These relationships aren't conflict-free because both people always agree with each other. They're conflict-free because both people have learned how to disagree respectfully. They've learned how to be curious about each other's perspectives instead of threatened by them. They've internalized Confucius's principles so deeply that imposing their will on the other person doesn't even occur to them as an option. This is what Confucius meant when he talked about the superior person. He wasn't talking about someone who's smarter or more successful than everyone else. He was talking about someone who has developed the wisdom and self-discipline to treat others with consistent respect and consideration, even when it's difficult, even when they're angry, even when they strongly disagree. Becoming this kind of person requires practice. It requires catching yourself when you're about to impose something on someone else that you wouldn't want imposed on yourself. It requires developing the habit of curiosity instead of judgment. It requires learning to see disagreement as an opportunity to learn rather than a threat to defend against. But the payoff is enormous. When you live by this principle, your relationships improve dramatically. Your stress levels decrease because you're not constantly fighting with people. Your influence actually increases because people trust you and respect your opinion. You become the kind of person that others come to when they need advice or help resolving conflicts. And perhaps most importantly, you become part of the solution to the polarization and hostility that seems to be tearing our society apart. In a world where everyone seems to be shouting past each other, you become someone who actually listens. In a world where everyone seems to be trying to impose their will on everyone else, you become someone who seeks to understand and be understood. This is the true power of Confucius's simple statement. It's not just advice for ending arguments. It's a blueprint for creating a more harmonious world, one relationship at a time. When enough people embrace this principle, we can start to imagine a world where political differences don't lead to hatred, where family disagreements don't lead to estrangement, where workplace conflicts don't create toxic environments. Confucius believed that social harmony started with individual virtue, and individual virtue started with the recognition that we're all fundamentally the same. We all want to be heard, respected, and valued. We all want to be treated with kindness and consideration. We all want our perspectives to matter to the people in our lives. When we remember this simple truth and apply it consistently in our interactions with others, we create the conditions for understanding, cooperation, and genuine resolution of conflicts. We stop seeing other people as obstacles to overcome and start seeing them as fellow human beings, deserving of the same respect we want for ourselves. The next time you find yourself in an argument, remember Confucius's words. Do not impose on others what you do not wish for yourself. Take a breath. Ask yourself what you're really trying to accomplish. Are you trying to understand, or are you trying to win? Are you treating this person the way you would want to be treated in their situation? If the answer is no, you have an opportunity to change course. You have an opportunity to model a different way of engaging with conflict. You have an opportunity to be part of the solution that Confucius envisioned over 2 millennia ago. Because, ultimately, this isn't just about ending arguments. It's about recognizing our shared humanity and treating each other accordingly. It's about building the kind of world we all want to live in, one conversation at a time. And it all starts with one simple principle that a wise man figured out 2,500 years ago: treat others as you yourself would want to be treated. That's the power of timeless wisdom. That's the gift Confucius gave us. And that's how one simple quote really could end all arguments, if we're wise enough to live by it.